Describe the advantages and disadvantages of arbitration. So arbitration is a form of alternative dispute resolution where a neutral third party makes a legally binding decision. So one major advantage is speed and cost, and it avoids the time and expense of court. And courts typically respect arbitration unless there's evidence of fraud or misconduct or anything like that. And it's also private. So this can help protect reputations, but at the same time, this can also be a disadvantage in sensitive cases like those from the hashtag #MeToo movement. Privacy can shield bad behavior, and it doesn't really get your reputation out there, which is why it's a disadvantage. And another downside is a limited judicial review. So once parties agree to arbitration, especially if it's mandatory, courts rarely reverse the decision. And if the arbitration clause was buried in contract terms, it can raise concern of fairness and access to justice. What are some of the constitutional challenges to mandatory arbitration? So mandatory arbitration has faced constitutional challenges because it may limit access to the courts and violate due process. For instance, when arbitration is required without meaningful consent, like kind of when people agree through hidden terms in an app, critics argue it deprives individuals of their property and liberty without due process, which these are a 5th and 14th Amendment concern. So courts may find such forced arbitration unconstitutional if it undermines the right to a jury trial. And this is under the 7th Amendment. And this also improperly delegates judicial power. So that's why courts have more power to review mandated arbitration decisions, unlike voluntary ones, because those are rarely overturned. Describe state rights compared to federal powers. So under the Constitution, powers are divided between the federal government and the states. Congress gets its powers from Article 1, Section 8, like regulating interstate commerce and national defense. But everything not listed is reserved for the states. So states handle things like driver's license, family law, and issues like local policing. And however, the Supreme Clause in Article 6 says that when a state and federal law has a conflict, federal law wins. For example, federal courts have overturned state attempts to enforce immigration laws. And so while states have broad police powers for health and safety, they can't interfere when federal law clearly governs the issue. Explain the Takings Clause of the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So the Takings Clause says private property can't be taken for public use without just compensation. This is the basis for eminent domain, where the government can seize the land for roads or public projects. But in Kelo v. New London, the Supreme Court controversially allowed land to be taken from private owners to benefit another private developer. The city claimed it was for economic development, but critics said it stretched the meaning of public use. While the court upheld it, the case sparked massive backlash and led many states to pass laws tightening eminent domain rules. Describe our freedom of speech in business, especially as it relates to our faith. So the First Amendment protects our freedom of speech and religion, but its application in business is a little more complex. So in 303 Creative v. Ellenis, the Supreme Court ruled that a Christian web designer couldn't be forced to create websites for same-sex weddings, reinforcing that freedom of speech includes the rights also not to speak. Similarly, in Burwell v. Hobby Lobby, the court upheld a business's right to operate according to its religious beliefs. However, these rights can be limited when they conflict with anti-discrimination laws. Still, in the business world, it's often, or any company, it's often people try to, compress you. You're not allowed to talk about religious, but I think at any time, since, we do have that First Amendment, we have freedom of speech. I think in the business world, no matter where you work, always try to integrate it, always try to give little, maybe even subliminal messages towards God and our true Savior. That's what I try to do at work. We're not allowed to mention it. I work at a hotel, but I always try to, because that First Amendment. Does the state file criminal charges against the company or its people? So criminal charges can be filed against both the company and its individuals. or the individuals involved. Legally, a corporation is considered a person, so it can be held liable for crimes committed by employees acting within their job scope. But prosecutors often target the people behind the wrongdoing, which is like executives, managers, or anyone responsible. So, for example, WorldCom's CEO Bernie Ebbs went to prison for fraud, even though the company was also punished. So yes, the state can go after both the company and its people, depending on the facts and who made the decisions. Describe why the Bill of Rights was presumed to apply only to the feds and how has it changed over time. So originally the Bill of Rights applied only to the federal government. That meant states could restrict free speech or ignore due process without violating the Constitution. But after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment introduced the due process and equal protection clauses. So over time, courts used these clauses to incorporate most of the Bill of Rights against the states. And for example, the right to free speech, the right to counsel, and protections against unreasonable searches now apply at the state level. So this shift has ensured more uniform protection of individual rights across the entire country. Describe the constitutional right against double jeopardy. So the Fifth Amendment protects against double jeopardy, meaning you can't be tried twice for the same crime by the same level of government. Once acquitted, you're protected from being retried, even if new evidence emerges. So, however, civil and criminal cases are separate. So that's why O.J. Simpson was acquitted in criminal court, but in a civil case, he was still found liable. So also state and federal governments are separate sovereigns. So each could bring charges for the same act, though it's rare. The double jeopardy clause is a key part of the justice system, preventing abuse through repeated prosecution.